On this week's episode of Make It with Calvin, I'm going to be showing you guys how I take these low-cost action cameras, combine them with some model trains, and make some interesting layout tour videos, and hopefully give you guys an idea of how, if you want to attempt to do it yourself, you can do so. And believe me, it's not as hard as it looks. Just need a little patience. So the video being released simultaneously with this is the tour of the Northern California Narrow Gauger's ON30 modular train layout that was over at the Sacramento Rail Museum that I went up to visit a couple of weeks ago as of the time of filming. Now, when I was over there, this would be the third time that I've attempted to do a higher quality, as I would put it, layout tour video, which means it's not just the view from the camera car. I've also included some views as if you were a model person looking out at the train going by, and I feel that adds a whole nother dimension, as there's lots of scenes that don't make it into the shots on the rail car in the town, and it just makes it more interesting than just watching the train going around from the normal perspective. What I do is I will release just the train shot for people who want it, but I find that the videos where it's the combination is much more popular, so I put extra time into those. Now, the most important part is the camera. Now, my recommendations are, don't use a giant camera like this if you can avoid it. When I first started out, what I would do is I would put the camera vertically like this, or you could do it like this depending upon what works better. But one of the obvious problems is it's very tall, so it's unstable, and it tends to rock a lot. And the other problem is you have to literally digitally go into the software and edit out the fact that it has been tilted 90 degrees if your camera doesn't already automatically do that. And in my case, I'm using either a GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black or one of my $50 action cameras that I use mostly for B-roll. Both of those don't have the ability to automatically rotate the video. So unless you're doing large scale stuff, or this is all you have, I highly recommend getting a camera like this, which is about the same size footprint as a GoPro Session or a Polaroid Cube. This camera, the exact model that I have not been able to find elsewhere. The link that I will have to in the description on Amazon is the same listing as the camera, it's just showing up as a different name and a higher price. So I cannot vouch for if that camera is decent or not, but just in general, look for a small format camera. It's helpful. I would assume that I'd be able to film on an HO scale layout using this exact camera. Definitely couldn't do it with this guy. If I was doing something on a standard gauge O scale or a larger layout, a camera like this would be fine. But one other thing to keep in mind is, because the lens is not centered on the camera, the whole shot will be skewed one way if you decide to set the camera down sideways. So just keep that in mind. It might not be that big of a deal, but it might give a slightly interesting look on camera, and people might or might not like that. As with anything, use what you have initially and experiment, and if you find it works good for you, awesome. If it doesn't, there's a lot of low-cost options out there if you just look around and willing to read reviews and maybe take a gamble, and if it's crap, return it. Totally your choice. Now that's all well and good for getting the camera aspect done. Now we're going to move on to the actual motive power aspect. You guys might recognize this as the Pimped Out Porter from the Pimp My Train series, and the reason why I have it here is just it's a good example of why you want good running equipment. You'd have all the greatest camera equipment in the world on all the greatest rail cars and stuff, but if it can't get around the layout well, it's no good. So for the actual motive power aspect, make sure that you're using a locomotive that runs extremely smoothly. Maybe take some time to run a track cleaning train around the layout. If there's trouble spots, try and get them pristine. If you're running a Keep Alive equipped or similar decoder in your train that will allow it to run over crappy spots of track without stalling, by all means get one or use one. If you're running radio control on your trains, well, you can just ignore all that and make sure the battery's charged. The main thing is make sure that your motive power source runs smoothly and can run well at a low speed. You definitely don't want to have the train whipping around the layout, or it creates a lot of motion blur and it just doesn't look very good. I find if the locomotive's going at about a slow walking pace on average, that tends to give the best effect on camera because of the way that the camera lenses work. The stuff going by the side will appear to be going faster than it really is, and it can get a little bit dizziness inducing. Now for the last bit, that is what on earth your railcar sits on. Now we have two examples here. One of them is a large flat car, which is this guy, it's just a stock Bachmann one, and then we have a short 3D printed one that I have right here. Both of them work, it's just the problem with the big one is, as you can kind of see, it's kind of prone to rattling, especially if you put a heavy camera on there. It's really prone to rattling, and you want as smooth of a base as you can. Now obviously not everybody's track work is perfect, I totally understand that. Don't feel like you have to take out every single bump and imperfection, especially if you're modeling narrow gauge. Bumps and imperfections are just part of the course, but you don't want something that's abnormally rocking the whole time like that on camera. It looks really bad, and it makes the video very difficult to watch. So what I like to use is this, which is just a custom little 3D printed flat car that's two fixed axles that's literally no bigger than it needs to be. And everybody is amazed that this thing can make it around a train layout without derailing, but once you throw the weight of a camera on there, it works really good. And I don't think that you have to necessarily run on out and have a custom frame printed. If you do want to purchase a frame like this, I will have a link down in the video description to where you can purchase them off Shapeways through my store there. If you choose to do so, it should be HO and ON30 compatible. If you're in other scales, you're gonna have to kind of figure something out. But if you do have a rail car that's stubby and doesn't rock a lot, what you might want to do is put some washers between the trucks and the car body, or look into a way that you can somewhat dampen it rocking back and forth. Normally, a little bit of rail car rock is normal, but for something like this, you want as rigid a design as you can, so that way you're not getting any undue rocking and rolling in the shot, which doesn't look good. Now for the final bit, which is the added cinematic feature of the train rolling through different areas, what you want to do is get creative. So I'm not going to necessarily say this is how you do it, specifically because everybody's layout is different, everybody's camera is different, and really, you know, everybody's going to have a different vision. What I usually do is I'll walk around the layout a little bit and kind of get at eye level where I can and go, okay, what's potentially a cool shot here? In the case of the Narrow Gaugers Club in Sacramento that I was at, I was poking around it a little bit and said, okay, the massive bridge the train's going to be going across is cool, and set up to do a couple of shots there. Don't be scared to do shots that you think might not work. What's the worst that can happen? You film it and you don't use it, no harm, no foul. It's just a digital file. You could use it in a bloopers reel, or you could just use it and say, hey, look, thought this was going to look cool and it didn't. What I'll usually do is I'll try and look for, say, like a road in a town, looking for areas that people would normally be standing in, to kind of give more of the shot effect of you're a little person standing there and you happen to see the train go by, or say you're fishing in a creek and you're looking up and you see the train go by. Get creative. If you're not sure, just set the camera up and roll the train by. You never know what's going to happen. So I hope this helps you guys a little bit with figuring out how to film on your model train layouts. It's definitely not as difficult as it seems. You definitely need, though, to have the ability to edit a video after the fact, which is useful, and also have a good camera setup. Like I said, small cameras are fine. They're definitely now a dime a dozen online, especially if you can find a closeout of one that you know is good. I know a guy who films a lot of stuff using a Polaroid Cube camera. He definitely gets some good shots, so I'll link to his videos in a card up here. They're definitely worth looking at because he definitely uses a combination of straight-on shots and on-the-railcar shots to give some interesting effects. And as always, don't be scared to experiment. You never know what's going to happen until you try it. And being that these are just digital files, what's the worst that can happen? You delete the file when you're done because you hated it, and you just go back and refilm it. So if you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time on Make It With Calvin. And as for me, I got to get ready for that train show in Pleasanton because I've got some awesome train tour ideas for that too. See you guys later.